It feels unlikely that a war shaped by kings, armies, and ancient rivalries could pivot around a teenager, yet history sometimes bends when expectation meets an unexpected voice speaking at exactly the wrong, or perhaps right, moment. Wars usually change because of weapons, money, or alliances, so the idea that youth and conviction could matter feels almost unfair to generals who spent decades preparing carefully layered plans. The puzzle deepens when we realize that medieval society rarely trusted teenagers with authority, let alone strategy, faith, or national destiny shaped by battlefield decisions. Yet conflict creates cracks in even the strongest systems, and through those cracks, surprising figures occasionally step forward without waiting for permission. This story begins during a long and exhausting struggle when confidence had worn thin and familiar solutions no longer seemed dependable. The tension between tradition and desperation appears immediately because stable hierarchies often resist change until survival itself feels uncertain. France in the early 15th century was fractured by war, famine, and internal division as the long conflict with England drained resources and morale across towns, farms, and noble courts. Battles reshaped borders slowly, while civilians carried the heavier burden of lost harvests, taxes, and uncertainty about who truly ruled them. Power shifted constantly between lords, councils, and foreign claimants, leaving ordinary people unsure which authority would protect them tomorrow. Security depended less on law than on proximity to whoever held power that season. Hope felt fragile, maintained more by habit than evidence. Young people growing up in this world learned practicality early because survival required work rather than dreams. Families relied on shared labor, faith, and routine to endure instability. Education remained limited for most, yet stories, prayers, and local traditions shaped understanding of right and wrong. Religion provided meaning when politics failed. Belief offered structure where governance weakened. In villages far from grand castles, life followed seasonal rhythms despite distant war. Fields demanded attention regardless of which banner flew nearby. Church bells marked time more reliably than messengers. For many, history felt distant yet intrusive. The future seemed decided elsewhere. Medieval society carefully defined roles by age, gender, and class, reinforcing predictability even during crisis. Authority belonged to landowners, soldiers, and clergy trained for leadership. Youth was associated with learning rather than leading. Challenges to this order invited suspicion, stability depended on obedience. The war itself followed expected patterns, relying on sieges, alliances, and control of strategic cities. Commanders valued experience, lineage, and reputation above inspiration. Victories came slowly and unpredictably. Defeats discouraged optimism. Momentum favored the prepared. As months passed, French leadership struggled to coordinate efforts effectively. Internal disputes weakened decision-making. Foreign forces exploited hesitation. The population sensed decline without fully understanding causes. Confidence drained quietly. Amid this discouragement, religious interpretation grew more intense. People searched signs, miracles, and meaning in suffering. Visions and prophecies circulated, sometimes dismissed, sometimes debated. Faith became a lens for interpreting events. Uncertainty invited imagination. Teenagers, often overlooked, still absorbed this atmosphere deeply. They listened to sermons, stories, and fears spoken openly. Their understanding formed without political calculation. Emotion mixed easily with conviction. Certainty sometimes felt stronger without experience. In such conditions, the boundary between belief and action weakened. What seemed impossible under normal circumstances appeared reasonable under threat. Desperation softened resistance to unusual solutions. Systems adapted reluctantly, possibility widened. A young person emerging from this environment would carry limited education yet intense clarity. Authority might dismiss them initially, yet curiosity could follow persistence. Belief, when consistent, often unsettles doubt. Confidence attracts attention, silence breaks eventually. The courtly world where decisions were made contrasted sharply with village life. Protocol, ceremony, and political calculation dominated discussion. Yet, even elites sensed failure approaching. Desperation lowered barriers, listening replaced certainty. France stood at a crossroads where conventional strategy had stalled. Continuing the same path promised continued loss, risk suddenly felt acceptable. Hope required imagination, change waited quietly. The arrival of an unexpected voice did not immediately inspire trust. Questions followed curiosity, doubt walked beside interest. The unusual demanded evaluation, systems hesitated. Stories traveled faster than verification, shaping expectation before evidence arrived. Some listeners felt unease, others relief. The war needed something new. Possibility outweighed skepticism, momentum shifted slowly. Youth, usually dismissed, now became remarkable through contrast. What seemed weakness transformed into novelty. Fresh conviction challenged tired logic, emotion disrupted routine. Attention followed difference, authority remained cautious, testing claims through tradition and ritual. Validation required approval from familiar institutions. Belief needed structure, systems adapted defensively. Change proceeded carefully. As acceptance grew in fragments, preparation began quietly. Words translated into movement, ideas demanded form. Expectation formed alongside doubt. History edged forward. This moment did not yet signal victory or transformation, but the foundations of change were set as belief, circumstance, and desperation quietly aligned, preparing the stage for actions that would soon carry consequences far beyond anyone's careful predictions. Movement followed belief as armor was fitted awkwardly on a frame not shaped by years of battle, while observers watched with a mix of doubt and fascination, sensing that symbolism now mattered almost as much as steel and banners. Travel toward contested territory carried tension because every mile passed through uncertainty, and each encounter tested whether conviction could protect against arrows, suspicion, or simple exhaustion. Along the road, soldiers reacted differently, some amused by the contrast between youth and mission, others quietly hopeful that courage might be contagious where discipline alone had failed. Leadership adjusted its tone, blending command with observation because something unusual was unfolding without any familiar precedent to guide confident decision-making. When armies began to move together, momentum shifted emotionally before it shifted tactically as belief altered posture, confidence straightened backs, and hesitation slowly retreated from conversation. Battles are rarely changed by words alone, yet morale acts like an invisible current, pushing individuals forward when logic suggests retreat and caution should dominate. The presence of a teenage figure at the center of strategy disrupted expectation because opponents struggled to interpret motive, strength, and seriousness within traditional frameworks of warfare. Sieges that had dragged for months suddenly carried urgency, not because walls weakened overnight, but because belief altered risk tolerance among commanders and soldiers alike. Marches accelerated, decisions shortened, and hesitation gave way to action, creating rhythm where stagnation had ruled previously. Observers later struggled to identify exactly when change began, since transformation unfolded across moments rather than a single dramatic strike. Communication played a quiet role as stories moved faster than armies, shaping reputation before confirmation could follow carefully measured facts. Soldiers interpreted signs generously, seeing favorable outcomes as validation and setbacks as temporary tests rather than final judgments. Authority found itself leaning into momentum, recognizing that restraint now threatened progress more than boldness. Strategy adapted to confidence rather than restraining it, an unusual inversion driven by circumstance rather than doctrine. Opposing forces sensed instability, not from weakness, but from unpredictability that disrupted planning grounded in expectation. Victories, when they came, felt larger than their immediate tactical value because symbolism amplified impact across regions hungry for hope. Losses, when they occurred, failed to collapse morale because belief reframed them as necessary chapters rather than decisive failures. Leadership cohesion improved, ironically strengthened by shared trust in something neither entirely rational nor easily dismissed. Command structures loosened slightly, allowing adaptability where rigid hierarchy had previously slowed response. Momentum favored motion. Public response transformed quietly but steadily as villages, towns, and cities interpreted success as proof that destiny had shifted direction. Support followed belief, supplying armies more willingly, offering shelter, food, and information essential to sustain campaigns. The teenager at the center remained an anomaly, carefully observed and constantly interpreted through rumor, faith, and political necessity. Age mattered less as narrative grew stronger, symbol overtook individual. Pressure increased as success demanded continuation because expectations rise faster than resources can comfortably sustain. Allies evaluated benefit and risk simultaneously, balancing opportunity against long-term consequence. Enemies adjusted strategy, recognizing that morale now served as a weapon needing containment. Psychological terrain became as important as geography. Control extended beyond walls. The reality of warfare never softened, even as belief intensified, because injury, loss, and exhaustion persisted regardless of inspiration. Maintaining conviction required constant reinforcement, particularly as campaigns stretched patience and logistics. The burden on a young figure increased disproportionately as attention magnified every word, action, and decision. Human limitation pressed against myth. Balance frayed, internal tensions resurfaced slowly, since institutions rarely surrender control without later reasserting authority. Questions about legitimacy, obedience, and interpretation reemerged beneath the surface of success. Political calculation returned quietly, observing opportunity within uncertainty. Belief encountered structure, harmony strained. Captures, reversals, and setbacks tested resilience not merely of armies, but of the narrative-sustaining momentum. Public confidence wavered when certainty seemed threatened, revealing how fragile belief can become without reinforcement. Support fractured unevenly. Hope persisted unevenly, reality intruded. Leadership faced difficult choices, weighing symbolism against practicality, protection against necessity, and loyalty against survival. Sacrifice emerged as an unavoidable theme because transformation demands cost even when driven by inspiration. The teenager's role shifted from catalyst to burden symbol. Visibility increased vulnerability, myth tightened. Trials followed failure swiftly as institutions reasserted authority through procedure rather than emotion. Belief was measured against doctrine, conviction encountered skepticism. Judgment replaced momentum, power reclaimed process. History often accelerates and contracts unpredictably, compressing consequence into moments that later seem inevitable. Outcome emerged not from singular action, but from accumulated decisions shaped by fear, hope, and circumstance. War continued beyond any individual, change persisted unevenly, legacy formed. What remained undeniable was that youth had altered trajectory not by strength or experience, but by shifting belief at a moment when systems faltered, demonstrating how human conviction can redirect history without controlling its ultimate destination.